Welcome to Status Secure, the weekly cyber threat briefing for executives who refuse to operate in the blind. Hosted by the Watcher 6 Collective, uniting former Army Special Forces and Naval Special Warfare Communications operators, alongside an industry-leading CISO nominated for Cybersecurity Woman of the World. We cut through the noise and give you the operational intelligence you need for mission success in a hostile digital environment. The enemy is listening. Is your status secure? Welcome to Status Secure. Today's briefing is about the new extension of the doctor's hand. 15 years ago, an IV pump or pacemaker was just a machine. You plugged it into the wall, it did its job. Today, it's a computer node on your network. It communicates, pulls data, receives remote instructions. But what happens when that node doesn't belong to the doctor anymore? What happens when it belongs to a threat actor? What do you think, CISO?
Well, let's talk about that, right? Because everybody hears about IoT, which is the Internet of Things, but very few people think about the Internet of Medical Things. So modern healthcare requires connectivity for telemetry and and your patient data integration. So you really have hospital networks that are connected to multiple devices, not just, and it could be thousands. Because if you think about a hospital, the last time you were in a hospital, everywhere you walk, there are medical devices. And so there could be thousands of them. These are all endpoints. And many of them have direct clinical functions like anesthesia machines, CT scanners, insulin pumps. So the reality here is that your perimeter as a security person is no longer just your firewall and your network and your laptops and your servers. It's now also the embedded operating systems on things like an infusion pump sitting in room 202.
Got it. So yeah, and let's be blunt about this. Can someone actually hack an infusion pump and say change a patient's dosage?
Well, you can look it up, but they've done they've actually proven that you can hack into. It says here that hypothetical risk, because that means researchers have done it. But in the reality, if a researcher can do it, then a bad actor can do it. So they can do, and it's simple because unpatched firmware, generic passwords, exploiting legacy, window versions that the device runs on. These are basic things that bad actors have been aware of for a long time. It's not hard for them. So, it's kind of dramatic because the impact is so great, right? So let's take a case. What if a bad actor, and let's say they were, and we had talked about this, remember, where let's say I'm an assassin from a nation state, and when our leaders are in the hospital, it's all over the news. So if you know where they are, the hospital they're in, you can go in and you can deliberately, disable pump that's providing critical care, medication, right? And just do all kinds of damage and assassinate someone without ever having to touch them. It's not just about changing medicine, it's about a threat actor looking at a hospital's entire fleet of and chaos, right? So I talked about an assassin. What if you're a terrorist? What's one of the best ways is to, look at a hospital that has, hundreds of thousands of patients. And then you go and you say, okay, it's 500 infusion pumps, right? And you say to the hospital, pay up or these pumps don't work, right? And if they were to stop those pumps, is there enough medical staff to deal with over 500 patients at one time? It would be chaos.
Definitely. And I guess, where my mind goes with this is, when do we transition from hey, we have data protection, or we're thinking about security, or to we're not thinking about it at all, and it just becomes negligence. I knew somebody who was in the tech startup space in the Bay Area who was making one of the first wearable devices in kind of the medical field. And I wasn't necessarily involved with it, but it didn't sound like there was much conversation around security, right? And maybe there was, but it doesn't seem top of mind. And I guess when I'm hearing it from this conversation, the way you're putting it, the way we're talking about it, is it should be. It could have been for them. So I wasn't too involved, but it just made me think. It made me think like, wow, I wonder if back then when I was talking with them about this product, I wonder how focused they were on the security or what things they put in place or implemented. So it does make me wonder because you're more in this field, especially in the healthcare field than I am. So how would you view this topic? Like from what you've seen, do you think that many of the devices out there are designed with security first? Or what's your thought on that?
I think the challenge is that, when you're building medical devices, you're thinking about clinical efficacy and how well is that device going to perform its potentially life-saving service. And it takes so long to go through the FDA approval process. So the thought here is really, and the focus is really how well does this device manage the patient care? And it should be, right? But the problem is that because that's the focus, security is usually an afterthought, something that, is put in, later, or they're not even thinking about it because they're just trying to figure the device out and figure out how to get through the FDA approval process to take it to market. Because the longer it takes to go to market, the more, the more capital, the more resources they are expending, right? Without any, without any, any revenue. So what happens is it takes years for the FDA to approve. So by the time a device is approved and deployed, the software running might be years out of date and even unsupported anymore. And then, but hospitals are forced to maintain insecure legacy devices because the device works so well. There was a device, you've heard of pacemakers.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, I mean, because people were dying from heart attacks, and so these pacemakers, they wanted to get them into market as soon as possible. So they put them
Well,
in.
I guess hold on for a second. We just said, yeah, but let's say for someone listening, well, they don't know what a pacemaker is, for example. So why don't you go ahead and just quickly like explain what it is? What's the function of it?
Hey, so in your heart, you have think of it as an orchestra, right? So you have a conductor who tells the orchestra, the rhythm, right? So, your heart's playing this music and the conductor is telling your heart what the rhythm is. Well, if something happens to your conductor, right, then your heart has problems, right? Palpitations, fibrillation, I mean, all kinds, your heart's out of whack. And so it can cause your heart to stop, to have a heart attack, right, to fail. And so pacemakers are these little devices that really become the conductor of the heart. And the pacemaker keeps, like it says, pace. It provides the rhythm, the pace for your heart. So that way it doesn't get out of whack, and it continues to work. Your heart works effectively. So great. So now you have these pacemakers that they wanted to get out because, a lot of people were passing away from heart attacks and it was preventable. So they took it out to market. They implanted about 465 devices, 165,000, right? That's 465,000 people. And then what they've discovered later was that there was a vulnerability in these pacemakers where somebody could tell it to remotely, just use up all the battery or to modify the conductor, right? So to change the rhythm and cause a heart attack or trigger the heart to go into defibrillation, right? That's, so it's like all that time, these people, about 465,000 people are at risk.
Got it. Yeah. So we're stepping into new legal territory, right? That's where my mind goes when I think about what you brought up. I'm somebody who brought a product to market. I've said it can do all these things, these life-saving functions. It works. You put it on a bunch of people, a lot of people, and all of a sudden now there's these vulnerabilities that threaten people's lives. So as the manufacturer of the product, like what's the liability there? I guess is the question. Is it a, what do we call that? Like a technology failure, medical malpractice? Like let's say if a patient is harmed because of an unpatched anesthesia machine that maybe failed because of some kind of vulnerability, some kind of hack or what have you. So what does that lead to?
So you're talking about like let's start with what's the definition of reasonable. Every medical practitioner knows that you have to provide reasonable care, right? But when we talk about reasonable care in court and with regulators, what does that mean? Is it just the doctor's care to the patient, or does it extend to the medical devices and tools that the health professional uses? Well, when you're looking at an organization like a hospital, right, or what they call providers, like doctor offices, that it actually goes beyond just the patient care and into the devices that the healthcare professional uses. That's how regulators and courts view that. So if you know that you have a device that's old, that's not separated from your guest Wi-Fi, that's not segmented, and you have the folks who know how to do it and you do it for other things, then of course a court is going to be like, well, why didn't you also do it for your medical devices if you're already doing it for other things on your network, right? So again, reasonable. That's very reasonable. So the courts are going to, there's cases, you can look it up. There's cases where the court required, the hospital to fix this, or a manufacturer to patch, or a hospital to patch their devices. And that now is forced. That's money that you didn't plan for. It's a project you didn't allocate for, right? So there's an expense. And sometimes there's a fine with that, right? If the courts deem it, so negligent. So if that were to happen, what do you think would happen to it, and they document all this. All of this is public information. If you're talking about, a regulator fining you or ordering you to do something. So now, your reputation, the patient trust, right? That kind of, that kind of thing is hard to recover from. Maybe you can recover the money, but you can't recover the trust. And then, I would say that you just have to be aware that malpractice used to be only something doctors worried about because of misdiagnosing. But now malpractice also means your CEO, your information security leader.
Yeah. And that makes sense. We'd have that kind of liability in other facets of, organizational leadership, especially depending on what industry you're in. You'll see CFOs will get pulled into things and whatnot. And it's a leadership, it's just one of those things that, you're walking into as a leader of an organization. And I can see that, how that would happen. And so I guess as we're on that topic of the leadership, so let's say we're going to give our marching orders on this topic. We can't throw away some of our legacy devices. We also can't tolerate a mortality risk. So where do we go from here? What's the next step?
This is an interesting question because every security leader should know this. It's nothing new. You need your inventory. Inventory your medical devices. You can't protect what you don't know. And there are so many in a hospital. So first, get your inventory. Know what you have. Know what's connected to your network. Know what's connected to other things, such as like the alerting system for the nurse's station. Segment that out. Create a network that is, separate from your Wi-Fi, because everybody has Wi-Fi now. You go into a hospital, they have a Wi-Fi available, right? So make sure you separate that out, that you segment it out, that it's air gapped, that, there's a separate VLAN. So that way, it's harder for someone from outside to connect to those devices. Those are very basic things. And if you can't do the basics, why you need to really think about like what you're doing, because these are basic things that you can do to protect a patient.
Yeah. And it's, you got me thinking on something here. It's, how you see those commercials talk about this pill that does this thing for this problem, right? And they show all these happy people living the life, and then they spend like the next 5 minutes talking about all the horrible things that will happen when you take it. And then at the end of it, they say, well, ask your doctor for a recommendation, or if they will approve it. And on the flip side of that, I think, you go into the doctor's office for whatever reason, and they prescribe you stuff that they know is like, this is the good stuff, or, this stuff is going to work. I have experience with it. I trust it. I know that everything has side effects, but this one, I trust it. So with that in mind, I then take that same thought to the devices and go, how does the thought process work there? Maybe staff that is used to a certain device, they like it, they trust it. How is that sort of, maybe, I don't know, maybe it's just my naivety on the subject, but like, how is that documented, or how do they come to a determination on that, and on that topic of this is what we're going to use for you? Like, for example, here's an example for me. I've had 2 shoulder surgeries, and in one of them, they were like, this is the way people have done it in the past with these tools, but instead we're going to use these tools, and this is how we do it over here. Like, this is how we do this specific type of surgery moving forward. And so on the concept of vulnerability risk, how is that factored in?
Well, it probably is not, right? Because the clinicians are the ones who oftentimes, like you mentioned, choose the devices, right? Not the security team. But this is pretty common across all industries, right? The clinicians, the operators, they choose the tools, and then security has to, deal with them. I would say that you want to embed yourself in their process, get to know them. If you're a security person and you've never been to a medical device conference just to walk around and learn about medical devices, that would be one recommendation. You need to see what's out there. You need to go with your clinicians. You need to go with the people who are procuring these devices, who are reviewing them, who are procuring them. Get to know them, talk to them, because once they understand that part of the review of a device shouldn't just be how it feels in their hand, how easy is it to use, but also how secure is it for the patient care, to provide full patient care, not just partial, but the entire time that patient is, and that device is touching that patient.
You bring something up. That's good. We were at a conference and there were medical devices, and I'm thinking about it from both sides. Let's start with I'm the purchaser. I'm looking for a device to do X. I send a team maybe to go and check it out. Should we start, having a different process where if we know we want to go look at something, or maybe we have an idea, we have our list, right? Our top 5 or whatever. Now the new process is, let's send a security person alongside the technician, or, whoever the purchaser is. So then we can have a security conversation as like a way to narrow down the field, to like filter out and help you get to the one that would be best suited, that meets maybe your security requirements. And then I guess on the flip side, as on the selling side of it, are we now using security as a way to sell our products? Like, I can say this, when we talked to people, there was no conversation about security, not really. And what I did see was a lot of conversation about AI. Oh, I have this tool, also AI, right? It was, I have this tool, also AI. AI is in all my tools, AI, AI, AI. So like, I guess when I'm there, I'm going, okay, you have these tools that have AI that do all these things. Maybe the next question is, how secure is it? And do they have an answer for that?
I don't think you can ask them how secure is it, because they'll give you some answer, and the person with you, it's like, oh, that's not my job. That's his job. I think what you need to talk about is, and because everybody in the healthcare talks about HIPAA, right? Privacy, patient data. So if you talk in terms of that, I mean, they've done such a great job of promoting HIPAA and patient privacy that everybody understands that you have to be, if you say, hey, is your device HIPAA compliant? Oh, they right away will tell you, yes, it is. No, it isn't. Right. And then what you want to do when you say, hey, are you HIPAA compliant? And they say yes, then you dig a little bit deeper, right? Because part of being HIPAA compliant is being secure, right? Protecting that patient information, right? And how do you protect patient information? You have to have security controls on it. So that's the way I would say for security professionals to deal with, to integrate into the process for medical devices, is go through the regulation. A lot of times security people, I think, want to talk about right? They want to talk about the security controls. How secure is it? Is it encrypted, right? And these people don't, they don't understand that. That's not their priority. Their priority is how quickly, accurately can this this device perform its function. So that way the patient can have the surgery quickly or have the least damage during, or provide whatever medication, like in the case of a pump, like, an infusion pump. Like those are the things that they care about. So that's why you've got to use their terminology, what's important to them to get what, is important to us, which in the end is important to the patient.
Yeah, and that makes sense. I guess I'm envisioning a future where, security is a bigger part of the conversation. Like I would like to see from, the creator's side, the manufacturer side, the developer side of, we've developed this product, and because we're living in the day and age where everything now is becoming connected in some way, shape, or form, here's how ours stands out above the rest in terms of security. Like maybe we all are compliant with these regulations. However, we've taken an extra step. So I guess I'm looking at it for how can we utilize proper security that kind of goes above the baseline, right? Kind of the floor that everyone has to meet. But how can we use security as a selling pitch? How can we use it as, putting your product above the rest, standing out above the rest, right? Does that make sense?
It does. It does. And I think you can do it. I think as a vendor for medical devices, you can absolutely do that. But you've got to talk about patient safety then, patient, like you have to go from that direction. Because if I'm a doctor or, and I'm going to, or, or someone at the hospital who's going to look at medical devices, what I'm there for is how do I provide better care for my patient, right? So you've got to approach it from that. Like if you're a vendor and you just talk about, oh, our devices are more secure than, the booth next to me. Okay, right? But what does that mean? So you have to say, we we save lives too. And this is, and we save lives because our devices will protect the patient's information, protect the patient from getting like, I don't know what's the term, like, incorrect care, right? Or incorrect doses or incorrect, surgeries, right? Whatever you want to call it. But you have to, this comes down to just sales and marketing, right? How do you market securities? So it talks to a healthcare provider, right? Who's providing care directly to the patient. How do you talk to them, to the things that matter to them? So if you want to market to them, I would say, again, our devices are really secure. And so it protects the patient, through multiple ways, right? It does what it's supposed to do. And on top of that, you don't have to worry that that patient's information or or the care that you're providing to the patient is going to be, compromised and sabotaged. Yes.
Yeah, and so right now, let's just say I'm on the purchasing side, and let's say I'm looking at my inventory. Maybe I'm in the process now of going. We're ready to get new stuff, right? Like we're good. Like we know that we're phasing this out and we're bringing this something in, and we're in that process. And so let's say I'm listening to this podcast. I'm like, okay, I get it. I do need to have some focus on security here. What are some questions to ask? Like just to make sure I'm covering my bases.
So if I'm coming from the provider side, so if I was coming from the provider side, I think you really need to just be more educated, right, in terms of what you're looking for. And it's going to be a little bit hard, I think, but I would ask this. What is your, what's your stance on protecting the patient? Like, how do you, besides giving me a device that should work and do what you say it does, what other things does your company do to protect my patients? I would ask that if I was a provider, right? And see if they say security. See if they, if that's something that's important to them, that they're protecting my, the device from sabotage, right? So, yeah, I would ask that, so that would be one definite question. Do you need more than one question? I think that's a pretty good one.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think too, it's, it's mindset as well, right? Even just thinking about it and making sure it's part of the conversation. So, and I think we've covered this pretty good, and yeah, we're ready to move on. So we're done with this episode, and, we'll see you guys next week. And so the perimeter that we're talking about here is no longer just your network, right? It's embedded software on the instruments that save lives. So when the doctor's hand is networked, the doctor's responsibility is then networked, right? So for this topic, our mission success is about patient safety. And so let's get out there and execute to that standard. See you next week. Mission success isn't about luck. It's about preparation. You've heard the intel. Now, go put it to use. If you need to verify your security posture, I've established a secure line at watcher6.com/secure. Go there to get the briefing the enemy doesn't want you to have. We'll see you next week. Until then, keep your head on a swivel.